Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Tim Selvadurai, and we're going to be discussing his amazing novel, 142 Wellington Place. Now, it's available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. And if you guys want to gather more information on Tim and really learn a little bit more about the book, you can check out his video on YouTube. Head on over to youtube.com, type in his name, Tim Selvadurai, or you can type in the book title, 142 Wellington Place. Now, I do want to quickly point out that Tim was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by one of the best publishers in the business, Author Reputation Press. So if you or anyone you know have a book that they'd like moved, people, give yourself the best gift you could possibly give. Contact ARP and have their wonderful team move it for you. Find out more information on them and what they can offer through authorreputationpress.com. And listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Tim here on the line. And just so you're aware, we're going to barely scratch the surface, okay? We're going to cover some of the topics of it. We're going to go into it in brief detail, but you're going to have to head on over to Amazon and Barnes & Noble, as I've mentioned, and purchase copies for yourself if you want to gather everything that Tim has in store, all right? And without further ado, he's written the book, he's done the research, and he's going to be able to articulate it much better than I ever could, so let's bring him here with us. Tim, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm doing fine, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Tim, this is a true pleasure and an absolute delight to have you here on the network. I think having a book of this magnitude, right, as I mentioned, a nonstop page turner, right, mystery suspense novel, something that I would not be surprised if we saw it on the silver screen very, very shortly. I work in Hollywood, and let me tell you, we're pretty tapped out with ideas here. So this is something that's fresh and really something that needs to be on the TV screen very soon. But that'll be for another discussion. Before we jump into your book, Tim, let's start off with a little more information on yourself. Tell us about your background, please.
Well, I was born in Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka, and I worked for 25 years as a professional staff officer in the United Nations with UNESCO, UNDP, and the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, at its headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya, before immigrating to Canada with my family. So I'm now a citizen of this country, and I live in Canada with my family. I had my education in Sri Lanka as well as in England, and I've come here, and still, as I came in here, I took a course with the University of York, where I learned to teach English to immigrants, and have been doing that for the last several years, something that I thoroughly enjoy. In my spare time, I do a lot of reading, and I'm particularly interested in reading mystery novels because they are things that have suspense, and there's always a plot that you try to unwind. This is basically my general background.
Tim, without further ado, man, 142 Wellington Place. Tell us a little bit more about your novel.
Yes, my novel, I came to write this novel, started, quite honestly, I didn't plan to write this book. Started as a way of killing time while waiting to have my car serviced. And I had a pencil, and I started writing on a 4 by 6 inch diary. And I had no plan or plot in mind at that time. And the story just evolved chapter by chapter as it by osmosis until it was finished. I had no idea what the conclusion was going to be. It wrote itself, and events unraveled. And when the book was written first, I had it in my drawer in my cabinet, and my daughter and my daughter-in-law read it, and they were very impressed by it. and they insisted that I should get it published. So I got it published, and it was given the prestigious Editor's Choice Award, which was very encouraging. The story itself is a mystery story set in England with scenes that oscillate between London and Wimbledon. It's told in the first person. The narrator, Ben Benison, is a former World War II RAF pilot. The story begins with his receiving a frantic call from Celia, the wife of his former RAF colleague, Don Murray. She says that she has had a visit from a woman, Ada Hamilton, who says that she's pregnant and that Don is the father. Next, Ben visits Don, who is in London on business at his rooming house at 142 Wellington Place. Don admits that he has had an affair with Ada, and Ben has the unpleasant task of conveying this to Celia, who is devastated. The same evening, the police inform Ben and Celia that Don has been found dead in his hotel room. At first, they're not sure if it is a suicide or a murder, but they later discover some evidence that points to a possible murder. The plot thickens, and there are a number of interesting episodes, such as police investigation and interrogation of a number of witnesses, an inquest into the death of Don Murray, and Scotland Yard is brought in to gather evidence. There is a court case at the famous London court, the Old Bailey, and the book moves on chapter by chapter, unraveling the different elements that eventually point to who the culprit was or is. So it's a fast-moving novel. It has a lot of suspense, and I might mention later that it has had some very good reviews. It was given, as I said, the Editor's Choice Award, which is a prestigious award by the first publishing company, and it has also been chosen to by the Gold Seal organization for the Eric Hoffer Gold Seal Award for self-published books, and it is which is going to be I think the award is going to be discussed in April. There are a few other books that are obviously up for consideration as well. But that's basically the story about the book and how it came to be written.
Mm-hmm. Tim, thank you very much for all of that. And listen, you've already started to go into inspiration, so I know we don't need to cover what inspired this particular novel and where this one came from, but I still want to talk about inspiration for a second with regards to your writing background. Tim, where does the love for creative writing come from? Were you always a writer growing up? Was this a hobby of yours? Were there artists that inspired you? Talk to us about where that love for writing comes from.
Well, actually, I'm a voracious reader, and I have a great love for the lyricism of the English language. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in reading poetry and reading lyrical passages from Shakespeare and the Bible, and repeating them and learning them by heart. And as far as my reading goes, I'm fairly omnivorous, and I read practically everything. I read novels, but I tend to concentrate on novels that deal with problem-solving situations, or where you're trying to find out what the plot leads to. Yeah. So it was natural for me to read, to be interested in. It's natural for me to be reading mystery novels and to be thinking of writing one of those, which is what I did. So basically, as for the future, I'm very interested in writing things. I've been working for a long time. I just took my retirement just a couple of months ago, and I have a few projects in mind. I'm very interested in writing things that deal with subjects like philosophy, sociology, religion, and I have one or two projects in mind. I'm starting a book to deal with certain rules for life based on different study aspects that deal with psychological and sociological problems. And a few other things that are in the back of my mind which I have not yet put down on paper, but I certainly want to continue writing.
With regards to this book, 142 Wellington Place, Tim, what was a highlight for you in writing the book? Or if not a highlight, something that surprised you that you weren't anticipating before you started writing it?
Well, as I said earlier, the book started, I started writing it really as a way of killing time, and I started writing it and found that it was interesting, and then it evolved chapter by chapter, and almost by osmosis developed into a fully fledged novel, which people who read it in draft found very interesting. The story, as far as the highlights goes, is that it is written in the first person, and it is a whodunit, with the difference that the narrator, who is the main protagonist, helps solve the puzzle rather than a conventional detective like Poirot or Sherlock Holmes. And there's also, as I mentioned earlier, a letter of confession, which is used as a device to tie up the loose ends. And the story moves very fast. The sequences and suspense unravels chapter by chapter with the minimum of lengthy descriptive padding, which helps to build up the suspense without being boring in terms of material that has to be read for the sake of reading. So that's essentially what I would point out as the highlights of the story. The characterization has been called three-dimensional by some of the reviewers, because it not only talks about interesting aspects of the person's characters, but their attitudes, their emotions, and their approach to life and philosophy. So it has been remarked that the characters have been very interesting. They're three-dimensional. The book has also a lot of suspense, and as I mentioned, possibly there are twists and turns, and the novel moves very fast. It's not a very long novel, because as I said, I've cut out unnecessary descriptive parts, which I find a little boring in most of the books I read. And it's got 22 chapters, probably about 200 pages. But precisely for that reason, many of the readers find it very interesting. I've had some extremely good reviews of the book, and people writing to me about how much they've enjoyed the book. Basically, the situation as far as the book is.
Tim, sticking with your writing process, what would you say was one of the hardest things for you to do?
I think the hardest thing is to try and see that you can put the plot together. You write different chapters, and you have to develop a convincing strategy so that the audience, the people reading, cannot smell out what is likely to be the end of the book. And so you have to create diversions and provide information which is distraction sometimes from the actual direction to which the crime evolves. That I find was interesting for me as well, because it needed my mental capabilities to try and see how I could produce material that was that disguised some of the information, so that the book would turn out to be something interesting for reading it.
Tim, as we close out of this fantastic interview, we've covered so much information here today, but is there anything that we haven't touched up on that you really want to make sure our listening audience is aware of?
Well, basically, it's a very English novel. The setting is in England. The reason for that is that I spent a lot of time in England. My wife and I both studied there, and we Sri Lanka was, when it was called Ceylon, was an English colony. And so we had most of the influences we had at that time when I was growing up was the influence of the British influence. And England was our kind of place we went to if we wanted to pursue further education or find some excitement. So we have that background, and I think my book portrays very succinctly and clearly the English scene and the way of life that is prevalent in England. The language itself is geared towards more sort of very English in its presentation. And the scenes are in London and, as I said, in Wimbledon, which makes it a very much an English novel. But that does not mean that people from America or other places would not be interested in it, because the story still is a very interesting one. The suspense is very strong, and the book, as the reviews have said, is very well written and provides a lot of suspense and intrigue.
People, you know what you have to do. I mentioned it before. I'm going to say it again. Amazon, Barnes & Noble are where you have to go. Check out his YouTube page to get the video of this book and just get lost in it. And as he said, this is not the only book that he has to offer. It's the only book right now. But make sure you check back in frequently, because there's other aspirations on the horizon. 142 Wellington Place is only the beginning. Head on over there today and just get lost in this fantastic journey. Tim, this has been an absolute pleasure. Such an honor. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
Thank you very much.